Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Today we have a very special episode for you. We have a little crossover episode here with the guys from Bro Research Radio. Our listeners might be familiar with Ryan, who's back on for round 2. And then we are also fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Ben House today. How you doing, guys?
Doing great. It's great to be back on. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, for our listeners who might not be too familiar with you, could you provide us with a brief introduction so they can get to know you a little bit better?
I have a PhD in nutritional sciences from UT Austin. Been lifting since I can remember, since I was definitely like 13 or 12 or 13 years old, albeit not very well. Got my first personal training certification when I was like 19 years old. Started training people illegally at a gym for sure. And then that continued to train people in my garage. I love everything about training. I love everything about fitness and nutrition, and just had the honor to be able to practice and learn about this for a long period of time. And that really just has opened me up to how much I don't know. And so I'm excited. Metabolic stress is something that we talk about. And I think in the innosphere, in the blogosphere, whatever you want to call social media, it definitely has like sex appeal and like there's these things that people say. But from the research side, it's really, really hard to just be able to look at this metabolic stress pathway independently of mechanical tension. And I don't know that it's even helpful to do that practically. I think like once we get into the minutia of this, it's fun and it's cool to talk about, but the practical applications are much more interesting to me. And I think that we can come together on the practical applications, whereas the individual nuances of mechanistic data is cool. And it's fun to talk about like whether type 2X fibers are going to convert to type 2A fibers. And that's probably going to happen regardless of your strength training program. You might be able to get it to happen less. And if you're training athletes, I don't know that like this is a different conversation for you, depending on what type of athlete you have. But if you're training the gen pop, the metabolic stress pathway is the pathway that I'm going to chase for a pretty long period of time when they start on the ship.
Excellent. Yeah, and as Ben kind of alluded to there, so we've kind of been conducting this series on, more or less, you could call them like advanced hypertrophy strategies. And today our primary focus of the discussion is metabolic stress. We're definitely going to get into some of the nuances like Ben said, but going to spend a large proportion of this episode, discussing some more practical aspects of programming, metabolite training. If this is something that people concerned with muscle hypertrophy should be utilizing and how frequently they should be utilizing these sorts of blocks. But with that said, and to kind of just lay down the groundwork for this episode, Ryan or Ben, feel free to start out with this question. When we look at metabolic stress, what exactly is metabolic stress? And then following that, is this a primary mechanism which drives hypertrophy, or is this more or less just kind of a backdoor to mechanical tension that may or may not actually provide any unique benefits?
Oh, that's okay. I'll attempt to take this one. I think when we talk about metabolic stress, we're talking about it from a local standpoint, because there is a terminology thrown out there that we were talking more about like a systemic kind of response, and that's something a little bit different. When we're talking about this, we're talking at a very local level. We'll take the bicep, for instance, because everyone loves biceps, so let's focus in there. But if we do a set of 15 reps or something with some substantial enough a load that it's actually getting difficult by the end of that set, we're going to see some metabolite formation. So it's going to be primarily hydrogen is going to be the big driver there. We're probably going to see decreases in phosphocreatine, like all the things that you would expect that would lead to fatigue. Lactate is going to be associated with that. Lactate is not the reason that you're becoming fatigued, but it's all kind of part of this interwoven kind of system here. So I think like when we're talking about this on practical terms, like all of the fancy terminology is all really cool, and like what's happening locally at the muscle itself is super interesting and something that like I like to pursue myself, just to know it more. It's just like it's just a nice intellectual pursuit. But when we're talking about it in the gym, it's a fucking pump. Okay, like it doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. Like you're gonna get a pump in your biceps. If you're getting a pump in your biceps, there's some amount of metabolic stress that's taking place at that local tissue. So when we think about that, like that kind of expands it out pretty far, because it doesn't necessarily have to be, because the way that we'll talk about this practically a lot of times is like, oh, well, metabolic stress is 12 to 20 reps or something like that. Well, I don't think that that's necessarily true. Like, and just as mechanical tension is said to be like this 6 to 12 rep range thing, right? So there, like you said, there is this crossover between the two primary pathways towards hypertrophy. So I'm not sure that we can really get one without the other, unless we're really just like occluding or doing blood flow restriction without any exercise whatsoever. And there does seem to be some benefit to that in certain populations. But when we're talking about it in practical terms, yeah, it's going to be very difficult to tease those things out. So the follow-up question to that is metabolic stress just a backdoor pathway, or is an independent pathway towards hypertrophy? I'm not sure that we completely have the answer to that just yet, but I'm also not sure that it really matters, as Ben already kind of alluded to in the intro there. These things become more practical than anything else. So I think that's where, like Ben said, that's really the interesting conversation here to me. As much as I would love to know the answer to that and be able to answer it definitively. I'm not sure, maybe we will in our lifetime, but it's really more about like, how do you use these different protocols that are more towards one end than the other, and when do we do it, and why do we do it, and with who, with whom? I don't know. I'm not, is that English? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's where it becomes interesting.
This idea of metabolic stress was coined by Schoenfeld, I think, in 2017. And so that, like, it's a culmination of all these things: cell swelling, lactate accumulation, hydrogen ions, all this stuff happening at the muscle level. So it's a catch-all term, and it's a fun catch-all term to use. But, and I think Ryan said this really well, is like metabolic stress locally is, yeah, it's fun. It's like what we all want to do in the gym. It's like why you did like triples, like you did the sevens. Like I remember doing the curls, like the 21s, like 21s. Dude, like that's why you did this shit. And so it wasn't because of like, oh my God, cell swelling. Like it was because you got a pump. And then on the side, so if you're getting a pump, that's fabulous. But if you feel like you're gonna puke, that's systemic stress, and that is also I think important, because when we think about if you want to win all the hypertrophies, you really do want to. I think that you're going to program for this stuff anyways, because you probably want to work in a broad number. You want to work in a broad range of reps, because just to cover your bases, just because of all the stuff that we don't know. Now, if you're a power lifter, you probably always want to be doing some type of powerlifting, because strength is task specific and rep range specific, whereas hypertrophy is not. It doesn't. It's much more lenient, and so I think like if we're really, the idea of like, is metabolic stress, does it have an independent? Is it independently going to be related to muscle hypertrophy? I don't think it matters. Like, to be completely honest, like I just don't. It's going to be cool to see if there are pathways, but why would we chase those when we can get everything all at once? And so that's kind of where my head's at with it. And I do think that the practical applications of this way outweigh the nuanced mechanistic stuff, because I mean, if you talk about getting bigger, it's the time scale is years, decades. And so like, this shit's kind of boring. Like, to be real, like you're just picking, like my wife, like I used to have a box full of all my weights because I was worried about them getting stolen from me. They were outside, and so I had to lock this box. And so there's like 2,000 pounds of weight in there. And I just remember, like, I would take all these fucking weights out of that box. And I'd be like, oh God, I got to put them all back in. So I did all this work. And at the end of the day, they just went back in the box. And I just like explaining that to I just remember explaining that to like people doing manual labor. And they were like, what are you doing? Like, this is completely pointless. Like, these guys are building a house. They're doing productive things with their work. And I'm doing literally thousands of pounds of work, 4 times distance, whatever, joules of labor, and not getting shit for it. So it is we can't take ourselves too seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just one thing to kind of follow up on that, like the one, not of the doing useless work, because I think everyone that knows me knows that my whole life has been that anyway. But I think this idea of like what extra is there to be gained from this metabolic side of things. The one thing that really interests me is this concept of angiogenesis and capillarity. And that might be the one thing where there might be some independent benefits. And it seems like there is some stuff coming out, some research coming out on that. I mean, not just coming out. Like, really what that means is, like, I just learned what those terms mean, and I just learned how to spell them, and I started looking on the internet for things about it. So I'm starting to find some things that may support and it would make sense. Like, if we cut off oxygen flow, there's got to be some way that our bodies are going to figure that thing out. So that might come in the form of angiogenesis, which is just the creation of new blood vessels and capillaries, and that is going to be the exchange of oxygen and CO2 at a local level. So and other nutrients and metabolites or whatever. So that might be one benefit that I could see. But at the same time, we do get that same effect to some degree, at least in terms of the expression of the gene of of VEGF primarily is what we're looking at. We're going to see expression of that gene just with high loads and regular resistance training. So it's like, wherever you look with this stuff, no matter what angle you attack it, you start to realize, like, shit, we're kind of getting all this stuff with everything. So then again, the conversation is like, okay, well, let's just do it all. Like, why not? And the reason why not is like, I don't know how you could argue it, because it's, at the very least, it's going to be a nice break psychologically from the boring shit you've been doing every day since you started lifting. So just varying things up, just psychologically at the very least, is super beneficial in my mind.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong here at any point while I'm kind of summing up these thoughts, guys. But when we're talking about metabolic stress, so if you're training in the traditional hypertrophy rep range, right? Let's say you're doing sets of 8 to 12, you're going to get a pump. And, you might not be pursuing what many think of as like the metabolic stress range. Like Ryan, you said like 12 to 20, but there's some metabolic stress there occurring. And it's very, very difficult to kind of tease out the differences between mechanical tension and metabolic stress. Like you said, you can, occlude and not do anything. And that kind of separates things. And we can kind of see there if there's something individual, an individual benefit of metabolic stress. But at the end of the day, these things kind of go hand in hand. But I guess under the assumption that we are talking about, a rep range which primarily pursues metabolic stress. So let's think of like that higher rep range in the 12 to 20. Ben, you mentioned that it's likely a good idea to at least do a little bit of work here and just overall utilizing a broad range of reps. What does someone have to gain by getting into those higher rep ranges? In regards to potentially, improving work capacity or buffering, is there unique benefits up there for generating muscle hypertrophy that you can't get in like the 6 to 10 range?
Yeah, I think to me, it just comes down to practicality. Like, what are you gonna do? Sets of 6 on a leg extension? Like that sounds like that's just dangerous. I think it really has to do with, I think it has to do with the exercises that you're choosing, right? Like a leg press. I'm not gonna, like, there's one right next to me, fortunately, and I'd rather put 600 pounds on there and do that for 20 versus putting 800 pounds on there and doing it for 10. That sounds like a really, really bad idea. And so I think just practically, I think once you get strong enough, like also think about warming up like that, like being a dad, like that's one of the biggest things for me is like, dude, I don't want to do sets. I don't want to do sets of fives because then I have to warm up for another, like on squat, I have to warm up for another 15 to 20 minutes. And there's also like injury risk associated because once you get stronger, you're a danger to yourself, right? And so I have to be way less on to do sets of 15 than I have to be on to do sets of 5. And also I've found like people are less attached to these higher rep range, the numbers on their higher rep range sets. And so like you can, whereas everybody knows like what they can do for 8, what they can do for 10. Like at some point you don't necessarily care how much weight you can do for 18. You're just trying to get done with the set. And so that's what's been really helpful for me is using these higher rep ranges is because there's less attachment to the weight on the bar and I can just get the work done and it's fun. You can get in, get out. I will say on like large muscle works obviously better with single joint exercises. I think it's probably if people are after a feeling or a pump, they're going to want to use it on single joint isolated movements. I think when you get into larger movements, even like a leg press, you get systemically fatigued, which like things turn into cardio. And so that's the negative of this, like, is that you do a set of 20 leg press. If you're legit doing a set of 20 to 2 IRR or whatever, like legit, like staying somewhere close to failure on a leg press, you're gonna need 3 to 4 minutes of rest. Like, I don't care who you are. And then, and you probably have to train that repeatability even within that rep scheme. So what are the advantages of going up into the high teens and 20s? I really think that there's a lot of practical benefits from a mechanistic, like what do you have to gain standpoint. I would say probably not anything special to those rep ranges. I don't think that like going to 18 versus going to 12 is going to do that much. But I think like that's the other argument, like let's make it bigger. So say you were doing sets of 5 versus sets of 20. Now, do you have to volume equate the sets of 5 to the sets of 20? That's a question I don't know. Does that make sense? So like you're going to be able to do a lot more total load by doing those sets of 20. So you're going to be able to accumulate a lot more work, right? But I don't know. I don't think you may need to do like 1 or 2 extra sets at 5. So it might end up taking you the same amount of time regardless. Like if you have, so I think it's more like an efficiency standpoint. Now, if you go into 3s and 2s, like, yeah, I think then you have to do way too many sets. And the research is pretty clear on that. Like once you start doing, I think this is a Schoenfeld paper, like they did 8 sets of 3 versus, 3 sets of 15 or something like that. And like the group that did 8 sets of 3, they were in the weight room for like 2 hours. Yeah. And the other dudes were so to me, it's more like practically, there's a lot of practical benefits of going there. And I think that it's also from a deload perspective, we talk about this a lot, like even joint deloads, like a lot of people are like, oh man, I feel so much better like going to a hack squat, or I feel so much better transitioning to this other modality of lifting. I'm like, yeah, it's just because you're not fucking good at it yet. Yeah. Like you get good at it, like you get good at anything, eventually it's gonna hurt. Like you get good at chest flies, like yeah, when you're doing sets of 15 with 50-pound dumbbells, like yeah, like that's gonna be a little bit harder on your joints. And I don't know, like tendon training and bone training and things like that those don't get talked about a lot. But if you think about like where people get in trouble with those things, it's definitely with drugs. And so like their muscles grow faster than their collagen systems, and they go pop. And so I think like training, like you gotta earn the ability to train inside those rep ranges. And we just don't know much about those bone and tendon adaptations and where they happen and how they happen. Just like we don't know that much about hypertrophy adaptations and where they happen and how they happen. And so those are just other things to think about. And that's why I have the belief that training over a wide range of rep ranges and is probably your best bet. And given all the totality of the information that we have, and honestly, the totality of the information that we don't have and what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to add to that, I think one practical benefit that I don't think a lot of people talk about too much, and probably maybe related to this tendon bone stuff and joint health and whatever, is just like the benefit of a sensory experience that's very similar to something else that used to hurt. And so like take for instance, like someone, and this has happened to me plenty of times, like I spent like a year and a half blowing out my back on deadlifts every week. Like literally every week I would just go like, this is going to be the week. And like, and it just like, yes, I would just keep doing it until I figured out some technique stuff and a few other things. But one thing, and this is like completely an anecdotal experience, but also something that makes sense when you think about what's actually going on and how pain works with the brain and how it is formed in the brain. It's a brain phenomenon. Unless you literally got hit by a truck and like your fucking femur is over there.
But then you probably don't have pain, to be honest.
Yeah, you probably don't have pain, or your femur might still hurt, and you don't even have a femur. So it's like there's some weird stuff, right? But like, so one thing that's been a pretty effective strategy for me and myself and my clients is just like, I think there's something really beneficial to like, you know, I get to a certain load when I'm doing an 8 RM or whatever on back squats, and it just starts to hurt. Like it's not even a good experience anymore. Like maybe you can't even identify where it hurts. It just sucks. And then you go to like 15 reps and the load is so much lower that it's like you're not sending that threat response immediately when you put that bar on your back. And now you're just repping out and you're reinforcing something that you actually like. It's like, now I feel my quads, like this feels good. I like this. I'm getting an endorphin release because I'm getting my heart rate to elevate and I'm doing this activity that I like doing, and it's no longer being associated with pain. And I think that these like peripheral buffering or metabolic stress kind of cycles or whatever you want to call it, I think that they have that benefit to it for sure. And that like, you know, maybe just like even something like a bicep curl, just like sometimes it starts to hurt after a while, like after you've done like sets of 10 for a while. And then you go up to sets of 20 and all of a sudden it just like feels the way it's supposed to feel. And you're getting a pump and it doesn't, you're no longer getting like that nagging elbow pain or something like that. And then that allows you to shift back into that sets of 10 again, and then you're good. So like, I think that's can be a huge practical benefit that I don't hear about too often. And that kind of goes, opens up the conversation for things like autoregulation and like, when do you use these kind of things? You could just use them on that basis. It could just be, I like to program these things in, but a lot of times it is based off of feedback that I'm getting from myself or my clients. And like what's going on here, and is it time to just pull back a little bit? And that would be the thing that I would do. And then like the really nice thing is, and that we can say in fair confidence from the research, is that we're probably still going to get the same effect. Like, so we're probably not missing out at all in terms of hypertrophy. Now, maybe if we're a power lifter and we're not doing a 3 rep max back squat for a little while, then yeah, like we're going to lose a little bit of that specificity. But at least from a hypertrophy standpoint, we can probably hang on to things, like even if we have to go up to those high rep ranges.
Yeah, I think this is an advanced this is advanced hypertrophy practices for advanced people. I would say that if you are a coach right now who is coaching regular people, like someone comes to me, this is something that like we talked about in our last podcast with Kyle, is that this metabolic stress training ticks all their boxes. You think about like, what does someone come to you? What are their expectations? No one that is coming to the gym is listening to this podcast and us talk about the minutia of this stuff. Like they don't even know what metabolic stress is. They just know that they feel stuff. Right? They have this expectation that they're gonna like all these. This is when I give talks on this. I have the opportunity to give talks to the yoga crews that come through my wife's training program. I'm like, all right, what do you guys associate with exercise? This is the first thing I ask them when I'm giving this presentation about like why muscle matters, and they're like, oh, like acid. They don't say that, but they're like, oh, I'm gonna feel a burning, right? So okay, so we have hydrogen ions. Like I'm not even saying. I'm like, okay, cool, yeah. You want to feel the burn? What else you want to feel? They're like, I want to sweat. Okay. So do you want to sweat? They're like, some of them say they want to be in pain. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm with you. Masochism. come on. And then like, some of them were like, oh, they want to be like, they want to be breathing heavy. They want like temperature rises. They want heat. Like, so they have all these things that they associate with exercise. I don't care about any of those things. Like from an adaptation standpoint, none of those things necessarily matter to me. I can get hypertrophy without them. But when you get a client, you have to make sure that you are managing their expectations of what they feel they should be getting. And some of that is really like managing threat response. And so the systemic stress can be very, very threatening, right? Mm-hmm. But local metabolic stress, that takes that can be like doing tempo-based goblet squats. Like really, really good to learn the pattern. You're kind of doing a weird ass BFR strategy. Like they're going to get hypertrophy regardless, just from them like fighting gravity, just from them showing up. Like it doesn't need to be complicated. Right. And so like, I think building those, and then also you're going to be limited by the tools that you have. But I think like just respecting that going over 60% 1RM for someone who doesn't have a 1RM is useless. Like it's useless. It's dangerous. Like there's no reason Betty needs to be doing a 1 rep max leg press. Like dude, we had some guy come up to the gym in Flow. And my boy Joe, he came up and I'm like, dude, this is a really bad idea. Hasn't lifted ever in his life. He's lifted with me and John, and it was a leg press day. And John is like 45s under me. And so like the guy's like, I'm going to try it. I'm like, dude, I think this is a really, really terrible idea. You just did sets of 10 with 45s on, and you were getting smoked, right? So you want to jump up to 490. And I just remember him just, God. I just remember dude just getting crushed. I'm like, I'll let you run it.
You got the safeties on there.
You got the safeties on. I just remember it just going down. He's like, wow, that's heavy. I'm like, yeah, you're not like no part of your body is ready for that right now.
So high velocity eccentrics on the that is the next podcast.
No, he can't control it. He wasn't even that sore. Like it was fine. Like he signed away.
It's Costa Rica. We're not liable. It's fine.
No, but sometimes but that's where I really think you need to take into account. Like there was no telling him no at that point. Like he wanted to do that. Like Johnner did it for like 15 reps. He thinks like Johnner's not that much bigger than him, even though Johnner's bigger than him. But so it was just really there's not much to gain from that. Whereas he'd already like cooked the goose. He'd done 2 sets. He couldn't he wasn't even going to failure, but his legs were like thick. He had blood flow there. There was lots of things that happened. He was out of breath. I'm like, dude, the session's over. He's like, no. I want to try that. I don't know where I was going, but it's just.
That's an awesome story.
That was fantastic. I do appreciate you sharing that, Ben. But overall, some of the muscle nerds might be a little disappointed. They might have expected that we were going to get into the potential to preferentially stimulate type 1 fiber hypertrophy, or maybe, specifically sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. But when we're talking about this subject, it seems like more so the most benefit we're going to get here is just in terms of practicality, like Ben touched on as far as like warm-up times go, decreased connective tissue stress, the psychological stimulation that can result from varying your training.
I'll stop you right there. So I think people that have that question, there's 2 types of people that have that question. There's really, 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 really big people that have that question. Okay, you can ask it. I appreciate that. If you're asking that question and you're not really, really big, stop asking that question.
Just go lift.
Just shut up and fucking smoke shit for a couple decades.
Yeah, for sure.
That was a very, very important point to make. As far as programming strategies to potentially target metabolic stress or a metabolite phase, Ryan, I've heard you talk. I think you did in our recent podcast with you, but I've heard you talk on other podcasts about utilizing like work capacity blocks. Is this kind of similar to a metabolite phase for you? How do you kind of program these, and what benefits are you looking to get out of them as someone who is really interested in winning the hypertrophy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that term. That's awesome. I'll have to steal that one as well. So yeah, when I talk about systemic metabolic when I talk about work capacity, I'm talking more systemic metabolic, which is also just another term that I don't know if I made up. I'm not really sure where it came from. But what it means, what I'm thinking when I say that, is I'm looking at there being a systemic response. And like there's all of these different systems taking place at one time. Like, of course, any time that you're breathing and living, there's a lot of different systems happening at the same time, but things are going to be dominated in certain different stimuli, whatever. So when I'm talking about like these work capacity cycles, I'm looking at more as exactly what it sounds like, the ability to do more work. And there's going to be a lot of factors that go into that aren't necessarily local. So when I talk about like metabolic stress as a hypertrophy stimulus, I'm talking about a very local response. I'm talking about getting better at the things that are going to allow me to buffer heat and hydrogen and the things that get rid of metabolites at a local level to allow me to repeat that effort. When I'm talking about a systemic metabolic response, it's probably coming more down to the cardiorespiratory system or systems. So that's almost always going to be the limiter. Even if you feel like it's a local tissue that's preventing you from doing whatever exercise you're trying to do or whatever performance measure you're going after, it's still going to be limited more by the cardiorespiratory systems. So that's kind of what
in that block. In that
block or in that workout. So like what does that look like on paper? It's essentially circuit training. Like it's circuit training without like dumbbell kickbacks and like band walks, right? It's like big, like this is all Pat Davidson stuff that like I stole from him. Like the things that I program for people are coming directly and from his influence with like his 30-30 workouts or his 20-40 workouts, and even like the density kind of things that I program. Other people are doing this shit. Like I just might be doing
like giant sets. There's tons of ways to run.
It's been going on forever, but I think like the goal is really to be able to do a lot of work in a short period of time. It's a huge output. It's a huge just like systemic response. You're having to shunt blood to all different areas of your body very quickly. You're having to rephosphorylate ATP very quickly. Like there's all these in a rapid way, in a very large way. So like that is kind of how I would define those things. So however you program that is up to you. It doesn't really matter. I think that they are really good cycles to kind of potentiate the subsequent cycles, and that are for me more hypertrophic in nature. Because I don't think during those cycles I'm getting any hypertrophy, for me personally. Now, I think that you can if you're undertrained, and I think it's a really intelligent way. So that's kind of how my progression works. If I look at someone, if I get someone who's like brand new, phase one is I got to teach them how to not do dumb shit. Like I got to teach them how to move like a very biomechanically sound way, so that way I can get them as quickly as possible to one of these systemic metabolic training cycles. From there, I'm going, even if their goal is hypertrophy, if they're untrained, I don't need to have them even doing 10 RMs, because they, like Ben said, they don't even have an RM. Like they don't even know how to go there. They haven't taught themselves psychologically how to push that hard. They have all of these other underlying things that need to be
It's a waste of time.
It's just a waste of time. Totally. Like, so what I can do with that person after I get them through that phase one of just learning how to move properly and feeling things properly and just getting the requisite movement down, then it's like I want to get them to these work capacity cycles where they're just doing a shitload of work and it's completely general, but they'll get hypertrophy from that because they're putting enough load. I mean, like, what do we need? Like 30% of 1 rep max to grow. So if I can do that like 5 sets for every muscle group of their body in 45 minutes, why the hell wouldn't I do that? And I can develop a really strong aerobic base at the same time. So that's like the worst thing for hypertrophy, but it's all they need right now. Then like phase two for me is like, maybe we're going to go do more of this local metabolite kind of block, this metabolic stress as most people would define it. So I'm going to be doing shorter rest. The load on the bar because of that is going to decrease, but it's still enough. Like they still don't need that higher level of training just yet, because I'm going to bring that sponge out as much as I can in terms of progress, and that could go on indefinitely for some people, honestly. And like Ben was saying, there's a lot of benefits to those training cycles. People love it. Like that's like put somebody on a leg press and just tell them like, You get as many reps as you can, and then you got 60 seconds, and then do another set like that, and you're not allowed to lock your knees in between reps. Like, dude, that's so much fun. Like, they're going to get exactly.
It's also fun as a trainer too, because like I've been in people's ears about that. Like they want to lock their reps out, their legs out. Like no tempo, no, go again, go again, go again,
here, man.
Go again, and they can do it. They can do like 7 more reps.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you teach them. So you're setting the foundation for this higher level thing, which to me is mechanical tension as a programming like hierarchy thing like that. And now, of course, we were getting mechanical tension this whole time, but just as far as like how I group things in my mind with programming and stimulus, that's what I will eventually get them to if they hang in there long enough and they stop getting results with other things. But it's like, why would I take the time to do that? Like, I just don't. I see a lot of people like training 2-a-days right now, and they're resting 5 minutes in between sets, and they're like 6 months into their training, or they're just not very big yet, or they're not very strong. Like or they're really out of shape or whatever. It's like, you got all these other low hanging fruit that's like, why don't you develop those first and save yourself some damn time and like, I don't know, have a life. And then when it's time, then you go to those things, if it's ever time. I mean, because for some people it may never be. So that's kind of like how like programming for hypertrophy is that's my model for it right now. So a lot of times it's like, when you look at it on paper, it's like, you're like, what the fuck is this guy doing? This isn't hypertrophy training. I'm like, yeah, it is for them. Then that's all they need. And that, like, I can bet you that they're going to enjoy this a lot more, and that they're probably going to be less risk of injury. And then they're also just going to be like a more robust human being. Cause I still have a bias towards that. Like, I want people to be very stress tolerant. I don't want people to be, cause you can be a bodybuilder and just be pathetic, honestly. Like, I mean, we've seen them. It's like, dude, like you're massive, but you can't walk up the stairs. Like, to me, that as a trainer, that's important to me.
Or you're massive and everything has to go right for you to have a session.
Yeah, come on, like, yeah, you got to crush like 6 servings of pre-workout, Matt Domney. No, he's gonna love that. But yeah, like, I mean, there's all this other shit like that I think is really important, and I think that all that stuff in the end will actually help you to get to the goal that you want ultimately. So yeah, I think that people like specialize early and unnecessarily. But I guess that was a little bit of a rant and kind of off topic, but hopefully that answered whatever the question was to begin with.
Yeah, no, I think those are some super important points, and kind of touched on what Ben mentioned earlier about how, like, you know, if you're asking this question, you better be very big to start with. And then, you know, maybe someone answered no to that question when Ben asked it, and then following up, you know, with these strategies that you proposed, Ryan, you know, they might figure out that, hey, maybe I'm someone who should be utilizing this type of circuit style training, building that base, getting stronger, becoming a more resilient individual before I worry about these strategies. But for those other people who might be very big and ask that question, you said for you personally, these types of blocks can potentiate your more hypertrophy focused blocks. So can you kind of elaborate on how you achieve that? Does it allow you to like accumulate more productive volume in future blocks? Like, you know, say you can keep up a higher effort for, you know, 6 sets as opposed to 4, and you're seeing less rep drop off between sets or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you asked me this like before March, I probably would have been like, yeah, it's allowing me to accumulate more quality volume. And I think that is important. But like, the more I talk to Eric Helms and kind of listen to his thoughts on training volume, it makes me kind of second guess that, because it's like, well, it's not exactly that we want to do more volume. We want more stimulus. So if we just become like really, really good, and even talking to Evans made me think about this a little bit more. Like, if I get someone like, if you get really, really efficient and like now you require a lot more work, that might not necessarily be a good thing. So I kind of don't know really where I am with this. So I always default back to just the psychological aspect of it. So there's like just a break from training, a different focus. I get to watch these numbers just go through the roof, which probably hasn't been happening for a while. So like week to week, like these circuits, this is where we play with numbers and stuff, because I think it's really motivating. We just like, if it's 5 exercises, we just total it up to tonnage. And it's like, you did 70,000 pounds in this workout. And you're like, wow, that's a lot. Like, and then you do 72 the following or whatever. So like, that's really fun. Even for me, I know that I'm tricking myself. Like I'm programming this shit for myself, and I'm still falling for it every time.
There's like 4 people who've done 70,000 pounds in the workout that he's talking about. You're not going to do 70,000 pounds.
You get there. That's cool. But if you do half reps, you do. So there's that. And then there's also, just like the psychological component of working hard. And that, like, if you're just doing like strict bodybuilding training for a long time, you almost kind of forget that second gear that you have. And it's easy to kind of be like holding back a little bit, or just not even that you're holding back, but you actually just get like really tired from shit that like you probably didn't used to get tired from. And then it's just like all of a sudden your workouts start to get really long, and you're just like, you just start to get a little lazy. And I think you literally just get out of shape. I mean, like, I think that really does happen. And that might be necessary to really drive that adaptation. Like at some point, like I know that like we've talked about this with Ethan and stuff, like sometimes you need to be so specific that it's like unhealthy to a degree. And that's okay. Again, are you Ethan Grossman? No, you're not. Like, you're not. Like, so, but yeah, like, so I think that there is something really beneficial about just like pushing those kind of workouts, because they're just so fucking hard. And then when you go back to regular training, it's just a walk in the park. So it's no longer this big thing. And like training for me is a big thing. And it's like, it's just something that I have to get kind of hyped up about. And it's pretty emotional for me. I'm just an emotional guy. So like that actually really does help a lot. And for me personally, and for a lot of my clients, like I just feel like you just take their stress threshold just in general as a human being, and you just like double it. And they're just like, everything is just like a piece of cake at that point. And I think that's pretty fair. Where does it, like, as far as the potentiation for hypertrophy and like the part about volume and being able to do more, I think there's probably some merit to that, but I think you can also take that too far, because I've seen people that are like, they're able to do like 30 sets for each body part per week. And it's just like, damn, like you're almost in too good of shape or something. Like I got to like make you worse. So I think you could potentially go that way. I don't know. What do you think about that, Ben? Have you thought about that concept a little bit more?
Yeah, this like, I don't know, the bean counting volume, like,
because we were both there for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like accruing volume is probably the game. I think that it is. I don't know. Hypertrophy is just so hard to measure, man. I just don't.
So accruing stimulus is the game.
Yeah, not volume for volume's sake. I think that can get you in trouble. I think there's lots of ways that your mind tricks you about how you're accruing all this volume. I mean, you just expand your rest. I think if you really wanted to be like, none of us are truly objective about it. Maybe you are, but like nobody's got a stopwatch on every rest between sets. Like there's I think if you really wanted to nitpick on yourself, like, are you really doing more volume, or are you just like changing other variables? Yeah. And I think the odds are that you're probably changing other variables. If you held all those other variables constant and you were able to accumulate, 2 more reps inside of your double rep progression of 12s, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. Now, is that the ultimate driver of hypertrophy? Is that the ultimate measure of hypertrophy? No, hypertrophy is the ultimate measure of hypertrophy. So, and then you get into the mental conundrum of it's just hard to fucking measure. So that's why we're in this predicament in the first place, is because like MRIs, ultrasounds, DEXAs, there's the most recent paper in they did all of them. They did like this 4 compartment, and they're like, individually, even advanced people, like, even this thing's not very helpful. Yeah. I was like, damn.
I mean, that's probably really, if we want to get to the answer to any of this stuff, we probably need to solve that problem. Like, we need to figure out how to measure the damn thing, because we can use protocol. Protocols are easy to come up with. There's no shortage of protocols. It's just like the thing that we're actually using to measure whether or not they work isn't even accurate. So it's like, fuck, it's hard.
Just once you get to this to me, once you get to this advanced land of the land of depreciating returns, right? I just don't know, man. I think you're at a point where you're just willing to try anything, and I don't think that at that point there's no loss, because what are you gonna lose? You're gonna lose your double rep progression on tricep extensions. Oh my god, like, and so that's where my head's at with this. I think that if you haven't hit this land of depreciating returns, then the rep bean counter thing might be really, really helpful if you can keep those other variables in play. I also think it's probably exercise specific, right? Ryan and I have talked about this a lot. Like, I've probably run out of runway on things like bench and squat, just because I did so much like CrossFit early in my life. Like, I banged out on those extra, and just bench press because I'm a pro.
Yeah, interesting. CrossFit
bench press because I'm just stupidly good at bench press for some reason, and Ryan took that away from me because he changed my question.
I was trying to help you. I don't know what happened.
So it's fine. I'll hate you forever. But no, I think like doing this on as many exercises within reason as possible is probably a really good idea. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit. And then I think like being not out of shape, like these systemic blocks are interesting to me because they change your RPE. Like, perceived exertion is such a big deal. Not only like session to session, but also like sets inside of a session. And I think that's one of the most trainable qualities in people. Like Ryan and I have seen people. We've seen people that are just like crazy, and then we've seen people that are just soft. And generally, those crazy people, like if you give them a protocol, they adapt. And if you give the soft people a protocol, they don't adapt. Go figure.
Yeah,
so I think
it's never enough for them. It's never enough. I'm like,
no,
I need more volume. Like,
no, dude. And I'm not saying this to be I think that's the right evolutionary choice, right? Is to avoid these things. So I'm not like, I think I'm a psychopath, and I think I'm a psychopath in the wrong direction. And I also understand that when I get people from the like general population clients, they want to avoid pain, they want to avoid struggle, they want to avoid all these things, right? So I have to trick them, and I have to train that quality as like, they have to learn how to eat shit, and then they have to and then maybe by the time they get to these advanced strategies, maybe they're addicted to eating shit. They don't even know if they like it anymore. They just know that it's such a deeply ingrained part of their existence that they have to show up every day at the same time and just chow down on shit. And and so that's where my head's at. I think like, if you have the privilege to be asking these questions, I think it's a pretty cool place to be. I don't have the answers for you, whether it's going to get you that 1 or 2% more. I also don't know that. I'd also ask you, like, is getting that 1 or 2% more, is that going to fulfill you as a human being? Odds are probably no, because you're here eating shit at the same time as me. So if you, and people get pissed like process oriented versus results oriented. But I really do think, like, if you're in this game at this point and you've been doing it for decades and you still love it, I think it's a win, man. And anything I can do to keep you liking and showing up, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, something super important there, Ben, is, like you said, we don't really know if you'll get the 1 or 2%, but we're pretty sure you're not losing anything. You know?
Yeah, you know you're not going backwards.
Yeah,
that's pretty for sure. Where you will go backwards, though, is if your identity is associated with weight on the bar. Because when you switch exercises, when you switch rep ranges, you're gonna lose, because strength is task and rep range specific. You're going to lose some of that specific strength. Hypertrophy, you're not gonna lose.
That's why I like these like kind of hybrid blocks that I've been doing a little bit more with people, where it's just like you got a couple main lifts, and those are more of like your strengthy kind of lifts where you get to stroke your ego a little bit. And then the rest of this stuff is more just the metabolic stress side, shorter rest, constant tension reps, like just making it harder. So that kind of gives people a little bit of both the things that they need, and they can very easily maintain their strength at the very least, and if not go up. I've seen a lot of people just continue to increase their strength. And these are like really strong people already. So
you don't need that much, like volume's not a big,
yeah.
volume's not a big thing for strength. Like it's,
Really,
it's intensity. So,
yeah, as long as you're touching those intensities, you're fine.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, a lot of great points there to unpack. Something you both touched on was the idea of volume and, you know, this obsession right now with accruing more and more volume. And a lot of people might think, well, as you become more advanced, you're going to need to accumulate more volume in order to induce progressive overload. But I've heard Eric Helms talk about this on a recent podcast over on the Muscle Memoirs. We recently had Brian Miner on. He said a similar thing, basically that from, you know, the beginner to the intermediate stage, they had to kind of significantly increase their volume, but they found that from that late intermediate to advanced stage, their volume really hasn't increased much at all, and they've managed to continue making gains over time. So you've both been in the iron game for a long time. What are your opinions on this? Where is your volume at now to where it was previously? What did you kind of need to do to get into that advanced stage in regards to hypertrophy?
Yeah, man. Let's take it.
Well, I just did a lot of dumb shit. So, no, I mean, I was, I can speak like anecdotally. I was a failed college athlete, a D3 failed college athlete, which is even worse. And so,
college.
so like, but I was always really good in the weight room. Like I was the best practice player. I was like the strongest dude. Like I should have been good. Still thinking in my head. And so that meant I got pretty damn strong at a pretty young age. And so then I just started going to Anytime Fitness after college, like didn't really care about it. And then when I think I was like 23 or 24, I found CrossFit and I got real good at CrossFit, like really fast. Like I remember like being at a backyard comp and like no one, like I snatched 185 and everyone lost their mind. And like, I'm like, dude, this is like this is like the world record's like double that. Like, no, like this isn't. And so that just coming up in that, I got that because I was good very, very quickly at that. And so I was just taking a shit ton of volume and got fairly big, not doing any type of hypertrophy work at all, as Ryan will attest to, and got to a higher effort for mine, not doing any hypertrophy specific anything, just wadding out. And so then I transitioned to kind of stop doing CrossFit, did mostly Olympic weightlifting, and then kind of found bodybuilding just out of like being scared of injury, because I've seen a lot of people like, which is with Olympic weightlifting and even powerlifting too, like everybody seems injured all the time. Like I'm like, dude, like we look at these studies and it doesn't look that bad, but if you really look at the studies, it's like 80% of them are injured at any one point in time. And so like, I just really, I don't know where it clicked on my mind, but I'm just like, training to me is so important, not because of the results that I get from training, but just because like I'm a crazy human being. And if I don't train, I'm grumpy and I'm a pain in the ass to be around. And so I was like, all right, how can I train with the least amount of risk? And then that just got me to bodybuilding. And I could squat, 420, I could snatch 270, I could bench press 330. Those are pretty decent numbers for someone who weighs 180 pounds. But I wasn't that big. Like my quads were pretty big, but like I had so much room on the table from like people, like if a professional bodybuilder looked at me, they'd be like, dude, you got a lot of areas in your body that you can get bigger. And so over the last 3 to 4 years, I've been working on that. And like my calves have gotten significantly bigger, quads have gotten significantly bigger, hamstrings, things that haven't gotten, like my anterior delts are still the same size because I probably trained those to death. So I think like thinking more bodybuilding is almost like muscle specific and like tension specific on that muscle. And so if you've maxed out on some things, you may not have maxed out on other exercises. And I think if you really are if you're chasing hypertrophy, that's what you probably need to do is like look objectively. Okay, you're a really good squatter, but you never really leg press before. Okay, well go do that. And get good at that. And that would be my first play for someone who gets to this advanced land and they have like if they're a guy, they have an FFMI over maybe 23, 24. If they're a female, if they have an FFMI over a fat free mass index above 20, maybe above 19, then I'd start really looking at like, okay, what muscles could, and you can obviously hire a coach to look at you with your shirt off, and a good coach will probably be able to tell you pretty well, like those are underdeveloped. There's also, Menno has a calculator where you measure everything in your body. And it kind of, it's honestly like one of the best things we have so far. And obviously he'll admit that there's a lot of downsides to it, but like my neck is 102% and my quads were like 96%. So I'm like, okay, like my legs can get a little bigger, boys. And so like, and so like, but if you're at like 82%, of whatever that is, of your potential based on your limb lengths and your limb girths and your height and your weight. And that's a massive proxy. And I don't think like thinking about genetic potential is a good conversation to have. Just try to go find it and just try to go find it forever. But I think like just being rooted in an actual, like in where you actually are. And I think that's where a coach can help. I know that's where Ryan helped me a lot. He's like, yeah, you're not very big. And he said that in a way that was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm big. Like I have lifts that are somewhat impressive, but not very impressive. And that means that I have these other aspects of my physique that I can work on. And as someone who has like a beginner's mindset or a growth mindset, that's cool to me. Like I have these other things that I can work on. Awesome. It's kind of like why we try other things. And like, I'm going back to powerlifting now because I'm like COVID, all this stuff. Like I just want to have like a task to be good at. I want to have like a, not quote unquote a purpose but I just want to have something to improve on. And I think that's really, really important for anybody.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about like the needs analysis thing yesterday when we talked to Kyle Dobbs, and I think that's something that you like can't be understated. You know, when I look at someone like Ben, dude was squatting over 400 pounds at 180, and he's not even a power lifter. It's like, I don't need to make this guy stronger. Like he was like benching as much as me at that time. Like I'm like 50 pounds heavier than him. So like it's not a strength deficit issue. So for him, it was like, all right, let's first learn how to use the muscles that you haven't used. Those are generally the ones that like, I think we can say like oftentimes the smallest muscles on people are the ones that they like don't get a pump in.
Dude,
they
my
never
lats.
seem to feel. Yeah, like you never felt your lats before, but you felt a lot of traps.
Dude, I could do 30 strict pull-ups. Like I've done 30 strict, like not like CrossFit keeping pull-ups. I've done 30 pull-ups, and I like my lats have grown significantly in the last 2 to 3 years. Yeah. Maybe I just know how to fucking activate them now. But
I think there's something to that, and like you can't like we don't necessarily have a ton of research to back that up, but it's like if this cell swelling thing is a pretty potent signal for hypertrophy, like then it's probably something significant. So yeah, like it's like looking at this person that you have in front of you, Ben being very strong, I probably need to start just slowly ramping up volume and just progression in general on the muscles that he hasn't been working. But on the inverse, like I'll have some other people come in that are like doing a bunch of volume. They actually like feel muscles well and everything, whatever. Like they seem to be fairly balanced, but they're like incredibly weak and they're not getting any stronger. Not only are they just like in absolute terms weak, but relative to themselves, they're still just as weak as they've always been. And maybe that person's doing a shitload of volume. And like, as Ben already mentioned before, the amount of volume you need to actually get stronger is so minute. Like once you've learned the skill of that particular lift, like you don't need that much volume to continue to get stronger. So if I have someone who's like already doing a bunch of volume, everything seems to be like pretty okay in terms of their technique. That might be someone where I just need to like, maybe I put them through a powerlifting cycle because it's like they haven't actually like progressed anything. They haven't progressively overloaded. They've just like progressively done more of like shit, you know, like they're not even like, it's not like a real good stimulus just yet. So I think when we look at like this volume thing, it just depends on where you're at, man. Like if you have all of these other lower hanging fruits, like I don't think that like Ben was doing a lot of volume. It was just like a bunch of systemic volume. It was just like he was doing a bunch of CrossFit. Like he didn't need more wall balls. Like he needed to do like some lateral raises. So I think it's just like the volume question, like, is more volume better? Like, it seems like with any skill or any pursuit, yeah, like doing more tends to give you a better result, but not always. But like even more than that, we need to like be like as Evan would say, like more surgical with the approach. Like let's figure out where the limiter really is, and let's attack that. Maybe it's volume, but I don't know that that's like the first place you want to go. And that's what it seems like a lot of people are kind of doing. It's like, this study said we can do 40 sets. Like 40 sets of volume was better than 20. It's like, I'll do 40. Like, well, why don't you just do like 3 more than you're doing now? Like,
and there's that recent study that showed that the people that did 20% more than they were doing, those are the people that got the gains. And then now all of a sudden, all these volume trials, you're starting to see like they're equating baseline volume.
Total sense. Like your bicep doesn't know how much like research says they should grow. It just knows like it dude, like hypertrophy is a functional adaptation to some type of demand that you're putting on the system. So it's like it just needs to be greater in some way than what it's experienced before. And then the stars need to align in terms of the things that will actually like lay down new protein and new tissue.
I'm gonna hijack your podcast real quick, just because I want to ask Ryan a question that I think people are like. So like, I've been talking to Dean a little bit, and so Dean's giant individual. If people don't know, he's Dean Guido. But so I don't know where I came across it, but like these tendon insertion points, like people are always comparing themselves to other people, right, on the internet. Like that's the game. Like everybody's comparing their highlight reel to other people's highlight reels, and that's the bane of social media existence. And so like I think when we get advanced, we really do like there's this comparison game. And I think like some people are just going to be extremely aesthetic and extremely, they might not even be very strong. Like they might just look absolutely enormous. And like, it's crazy to me, like these internal moment arms, like how much more you leverage you can have just for like centimeters difference in insertion points. Dude, it's nuts. So if you can put 4 fingers from your elbow to your bicep, like, I'm sorry, bro, but you're not like, it's going to be a hard time. Like you're going to have a hard time just because of not even your anthropometrics, but just like where your muscles insert. And that's going to be different based on every muscle. And so I know that you had in the outline for this podcast, you wanted to talk about fiber typing. Fiber typing in my mind is just like this complete, unless you're going to muscle, like think about from a research standing, like using that stuff. Like every muscle is different in every person. So you have inter-individual, you have intra and inter-individual variability in muscle fiber typing, right? Now we know that just training in general you'll go from type 2X to type 2B, right? Like you'll go from those fast twitch to like slower twitch. So for an athlete, that's kind of why you want to be careful. It's like you might be making people less athletic by training, like doing these, like making a good bodybuilder, right? Like they might just be good at their sport, right? So maybe they don't need to be good in the weight room. Just don't get them injured. It's why basketball, they probably like that's the main focus of the weight room is like just not getting people injured and expressing strength and power. And so like I think that we really have to take into like there's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and so like if your genetic potential isn't going to be the same as somebody else's, and that person might have got there just because of like whatever their genes, but also like how they're overall made up, like their anthropometrics. And you're not going to be able to change like where your patellar tendon insertion point is. You can't change that. And so just do the best you can.
So you're just saying that Dean has really shitty insertions?
Well, I think that he has
just really long arms.
He has, like, you think about his quad insertion points. Like you just look at his quads and like, you're like, damn, dude, you're all tendon. Like, like legitimately, like his, I don't even know, like his vast, like you look at where like I had pretty solid quad hypertrophy from just squatting, right? And you like look at where my vastus lateralis attaches and where my VMO attaches, it's like right by the knee. Look at that dude, it's like fucking up his thigh.
Yeah, it's kind of weird actually. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
And so I was just thinking about that. I'm like, oh, but you're a really, really good deadlifter. Right. And so you've figured out like how to be good at powerlifting, but now you're trying to be good at hypertrophy. We're in all the hypertrophies. And so like it's really interesting. Like he wants to get his quads as big as possible. And I'm like, yeah, I hope you can. Like synthol, like whatever you need to do, bro. but I think that like some people are just gonna, and that's not to say that you shouldn't try, but I think like we're gonna get more and more like with ultrasound, like that stuff's not necessarily going to be that hard to measure. Like, oh, you do have this tendon insertion point is here. And so that's just been interesting to me. And like from an advanced, people can look advanced but not be advanced, and that really does piss off a lot of people. They're like, dude, you're not even that strong and you're jacked. Like it's just like, yeah, because they're jacked. It's like I just wrote a post that I'm not actually gonna put on the internet. I'm sure Pat Davidson is listening to this at an hour and 15 minutes, but it's like it's about sprint training and how I hate that people talk about marathon runners versus sprinters. I hate it because like the sprint research is equivocal, and that like sprinting probably doesn't lead to more hypertrophy. And so like sprinting, it may or may not, right? But people always put up like these pictures of sprinters versus pictures of marathoners, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, that sprinter was funneled into that. Like, think of the systems. It's like American football. Like you're just funneling insertion points, origin points, genetics. You're just funneling the best of the best. Like, yeah. That guy's like, I just remember watching a UT football game and they were like, that running back is very undersized. He's 5'10", 215. I'm just like, he's like 18 years old. He's a bowling ball. He's like, I don't know. They're like, I don't know if he's going to make it. I'm like, dude, I'm so mad right now. That guy got that big just like doing, whatever. Yeah, he just existing. Just and so it's just be humble and just try hard, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I feel like I'm constantly saying to people. Like, it's a conversation I had twice this week already, where it's just like, just be like, you're not going to change a lot of this shit. Like the things that you want are just, I don't know if they're feasible. I'm not going to tell you either way, but it shouldn't really matter. Like you need to like this, because I can tell you right now, if you get that thing that you think that you want, you're still going to want something else. Like you're never satisfied with anything, which is what makes this like a really fun pursuit. Like I'm kind of glad that we don't have all the answers, because it's just like, you just constantly have something to pursue. Like, and that to me is super fun. And that's kind of what it's always been about for me. Like at one point I just realized that I'm just like I could get on all of the drugs on the planet and I would still be like, my calves are kind of small. Like it's always, so it's just about like taking this wherever you started and looking back.
You'd end up injecting all the drugs in your calves.
Yeah, well, that's how you do it, right?
That's how it is.
No, I'm convinced that like if I were to get on steroids, like, or any other performance enhancing drugs, like my lats would just get bigger and nothing else would happen. Like, I know that's what would happen, and I would just look even more ridiculous. But yeah, it's like you better really enjoy this.
Well, this is honestly a problem for you, because your biceps are like, your bicep tendon insertion point is probably not that good, because like compared, and so like if your arms were bigger, you would blow people out. Yeah,
maybe, but then
maybe your multifidus.
It's really my multifidus that's lacking. For any, like I was told by a bodybuilding judge at one point that the reason I came in 5th out of 7 at a show was because my multifidus was lacking, and if I brought my multifidus off, if only I had brought my multifidus off and built some muscle and remembered to diet, that I would have won the show. But it was mostly the multifidus, so I've been working tirelessly on it. Hopefully all the viewers on YouTube
tirelessly lifting, tirelessly doing deadlifts, which you've been doing. You really should do some back hyperextensions, I think.
I don't know.
I'll program it for you.
I don't even think that would work, the multifidus, actually. But
that's incredible. I can't believe somebody actually said that to you. But super important points to remind everyone. At the end of the day, there's going to be individual differences. And we're seeing in the research right now how important it is, like you said, Ben, like the 20% increase from where your volume was at baseline, rather than just throwing these people into either a high volume group or a low volume group. And then something else you guys kind of both mentioned is that when it comes to progressing from that intermediate to advanced stage, while the common notion right now might be, hey, you need to do more volume. If you look at the individual, where's their barrier, so to speak? Are they really weak and potentially, rather than increasing volume?
Like there's so many things you might need. Like you might just need coaching because you're not doing things correctly. Like there's so many variables like that might get you to that from intermediate to advanced. Like that's where I think having an objective view from an outside source is going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, you might be doing everything actually. You might be perfect. You might be right on the right track, and then you just don't think that you are because it's just time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But as far as the volume stuff goes, yeah, like I would encourage people is just to consider other things, because I think it's just a real hot topic right now, and just doing more and more volume. And I think you can very easily get yourself in a hole, particularly if you haven't addressed those other things. It's very easy. Like if your technique sucks on everything, doing more crappy technique is like, I don't know, it might make your multifidus bigger, but that's probably not what you're going after. So yeah, like I think that's like there's other things to consider for sure.
Most problems in the nutrition fitness world are like the logistical problems. So like if you're trying to get to 20 to 25 sets, like eventually you're just going to be doing single joint exercises. Like just that because of time, like hopefully you're not doing 25 sets of back squat because you're not going to last very long. And so like, I think that what other things did you change, right? Going from maybe you're doing 5 sets of back squat. Oh, I'm not growing. And now you're going to do 5 sets of back squat with 15 sets of leg extension and 15 sets of hamstring curls and 5 sets of deadlift. Like, what did you change? You changed so many things to get there, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that before you just blast up volume, I think there's so many other things that volume might go up, but there's so many other variables that you can take into account before you just put up volume. Like, I just need more volume. Like, and
then when you do decide to make that transition, like I think that recent study that came out was really cool. It's like, hey, like you it's not like this set number. It's just like, it's a little bit more. So just a little bit more. Like you don't need a lot of bit more, like probably. And if you find that you do, then you can do that. One thing I think that's worth mentioning too is like, how do you know like if you did enough or that you did too much? Like I would say that if you increase your volume and you start getting weaker, that shouldn't happen, particularly after like like it's one thing if you did like an overreaching week, if your programming is set up like that. But if you stop getting stronger, then you're probably in one way or another, then you probably did too much, because that should, in my mind, should always be happening like mesocycle and mesocycle.
Where I've seen this done well is like, so you could logistically you could do it off every set. But I think that gets like, so your total rep counts across 4 sets or across 5 sets, I think you could do it that way logistically. That's going to be really, really hard to keep yourself honest though. And that's what I've found is like, did you rest 47 seconds or did you rest 62 seconds? Like those things are, all of a sudden you have a lot of variables to play with. Whereas where I've seen this go well is testing weight on the first set. Like essentially your first set is your testing set and the rest of your sets are your volume sets. And if your first set is going up and you're micro loading that first set, so you're essentially micro loading off that first set, that's how I would run the volume train up. And then I would run the volume train on specific muscles too. I think that like Ryan and I've talked about that, like oscillating volume, like maybe this is going to be a lat volume block. Like, so you take maybe you're normally doing 16 sets on your lats. And so maybe for the next 6 weeks, you're going to do 20 to 22 sets or something like that. So because eventually you're going to just run out of time. And then you're probably not also thinking of systemic load, volume inside sessions. Like, so I think like you can have these, if you're trying to paint a really, really cool painting, you can do some fun stuff. And I think like the thing that we've talked about a ton on Bro Research Radio is exercise order. I think you're also running into like, you need to keep your exercise order the same. So the research in me is like, you have to keep as many of these variables stagnant as possible and consistent as possible while you raise these other variables to even know if it's having a significant effect. And then you can't even know if it's having a significant effect because you can't measure it. Sorry.
Truth.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up. You've both been extremely generous with your time, and I really appreciate that. Before we go, where can we find you guys to learn more about you?
You can find me on Ben's Instagram page. Go ahead, Ben.
Look here, it's Look Here Fit. I tag him a lot. And that's where you can find Ryan. Bro Research Radio, broresearch.com, at Dr. Ben House. I don't know. I might just start mowing lawns. To be completely honest. The fact that we can't measure this me winning all the hypertrophies is really starting to weigh on me. So I might just quit the social media game
until we figure it out.
Yeah. I'm just gonna the ultrasound though. It is quite interesting. Like having it is pretty cool. Just being able to play with it, because I think like a lot of people have illogical goals, and I don't want to kill anybody's vibe. Like that's not my game, but I think that where this has been really, really cool is and you have to be very, very sensitive in how you broach it. But say somebody wants to have a look that they can't physically get. It's like you can, with an ultrasound, you can kind of show them that. Like, and so then you can kind of kill that outcome. And there's the end of the road happiness hypothesis is like, that's a bad place to live, is like, I'll be happy when, and I think there's a lot of people who are, if you've gotten to the end of this podcast, you might be in a predicament where I'll be happy when these guys stop talking. And so like, I think like me trying to kill that in a way that they trip on the truth. Like, oh shit, I don't have to have that V shape. Like I can have that V shape. So let me find some. Oh, I really enjoy the process of this. This is where my identity lies, and that's okay. And so the ultrasound and like understanding this complexity, I think allows me to be more ethical and allows me to have these difficult conversations, because Ryan and I have honestly had them with ourselves, right? And so like if you haven't ever had these conversations, you're probably pretty annoying in the fact that you think you can always get bigger. You're probably annoying to be around in the weight room. Whereas when you've had these conversations and you're kind of grounded in humility, and you can make these masochistic jokes about yourself, which Ryan and I, like, nothing's off the table as far as humor. Then I think you can start really having a good time and really appreciating other people's how big they are and how little their multifidus is.
So there you have it, guys. If you haven't been discouraged from your pursuit in winning the hypertrophy and your lack of gains, I really encourage you to go check out Bro Research Radio. If for some reason you listen to this and you don't listen to that, I don't understand what you're doing, but it's full of great content. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on. Per usual, everyone, you can check out the video content on YouTube, and we're also on Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and Apple Podcast. Until next time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.